What really happens when a pope resigns? The answer is stranger than you'd imagine, from a resignation speech delivered in Latin that even cardinals didn't understand, to a sacred ring deactivated with a chisel instead of a hammer, a former pope living inside Vatican walls in someone else's papacy, and a medieval predecessor who was imprisoned by his own successor. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about what happens when a pope resigns. Fact 1. No one has to accept it. Most people assume that when a pope decides to resign, someone, maybe a group of senior cardinals or some ancient Vatican council, has to formally agree to it before it becomes official. That is simply not how it works. Under Catholic canon law, specifically Canon 332, paragraph 2, a papal resignation is valid the moment two conditions are met. The Pope must make the decision freely, without any pressure or coercion, and the resignation must be publicly declared in some recognizable way. That is it. There is no approval process, no vote, no committee review, and no waiting period. The College of Cardinals, which is the body of senior church leaders who elect a new pope, has absolutely no authority to reject, delay, or question a pope's decision to step down. Neither does any bishop, archbishop, or Vatican official. Even a unanimous objection from every cardinal in the world would carry zero legal weight. The moment the declaration is made, it is done. This principle actually stretches back centuries in church thinking, though the specific canon was only formally codified in 1983 under Pope John Paul II. The logic behind it is deeply rooted in the Catholic understanding of what the papacy is. Because the Pope holds the highest authority in the entire Church, there is no higher human power that could legitimately review or block his personal decisions about his own role. He answers, theologically speaking, to God alone. So the resignation of a pope is uniquely self-executing. It takes effect not because anyone approves it, but simply because the Pope said so, freely and out loud. Fact 2. Cardinals missed the announcement. On the morning of February 11, 2013, Pope Benedict XVI gathered a group of cardinals in the Consistory Hall of the Vatican for what everyone expected to be a completely routine event, a brief ceremony to announce the canonization dates of several new saints. Latin is still used for formal Vatican proceedings, and Benedict, a deeply scholarly man who was entirely comfortable in the language, began reading from a prepared statement. The cardinals sat politely and quietly, as they would for any administrative announcement. A few of them later admitted they were not paying particularly close attention. Benedict read the words in Latin, which translated roughly to mean that he was resigning the ministry of Bishop of Rome, successor of St. Peter. Because it was delivered in formal ecclesiastical Latin with no dramatic pause or change in tone, and because absolutely no one in the room was expecting anything unusual, there was no audible gasp, no visible reaction. The cardinals simply did not process what had just been said. It was only afterward, when the text was translated and distributed, that the enormity of the moment began to sink in. Meanwhile, outside the hall, a journalist watching the proceedings on a closed-circuit television feed said he understood enough Latin from his school days to realize immediately that something extraordinary had just been announced. He began reporting it before many of the cardinals in the actual room had fully understood what they had witnessed. It became one of the most remarkable moments of collective disbelief in modern Vatican history, the resignation of a sitting pope going almost unnoticed in the very room where it was declared. Fact 3. The ring gets a cross, not a hammer. When a pope dies, one of the first formal acts carried out by the Camerlengo, the Vatican official responsible for managing the transition period, is to take the pope's fisherman's ring and destroy it with a hammer. This is not a symbolic gesture. The ring carries the pope's personal seal and is used to authenticate official documents. Destroying it ensures that no one can use it to forge a papal document after the pope's death. The same applies to the papal seal itself, which is also defaced. It is an ancient tradition meant to mark the definitive end of one papacy before the next begins. But when Benedict XVI resigned in February 2013, no one had actually thought through what should happen to the ring in a resignation scenario. There was no modern precedent for it. The last pope to resign had been Gregory XII back in 1415, centuries before these particular traditions had fully developed in their current form. So Vatican officials had to improvise. Rather than destroying the ring entirely, they chose to deface it by having a deep cross carved directly into the face of the signet with a chisel, permanently marking it in a way that would make it impossible to use as a valid seal. Benedict's ring was made of gold, and the carved cross rendered it officially invalid while still preserving the object itself. The ring was later placed in the Vatican's archives. This improvised solution is now considered the established procedure for future resignations, meaning Benedict's departure quietly created a brand new tradition out of necessity. Fact 4. The entire Vatican bureaucracy loses its jobs. When the papacy becomes vacant, whether through the death of a pope or, far more rarely, a resignation, an extraordinary legal and administrative situation immediately takes effect. Almost all of the senior officials who run the Vatican's various departments and offices automatically lose their authority the moment the vacancy begins. This includes the Cardinal Secretary of State, who is effectively the Vatican's Prime Minister and one of the most powerful figures in the Church's day-to-day administration. It includes the heads of all the major dicasteries, which are the Vatican's equivalent of government ministries. Department heads, prefects, presidents of pontifical councils, all of them are simultaneously suspended from their authority. They do not lose their jobs permanently, but they cannot make any significant decisions during the vacancy. The logic is that these officials govern in the name of the Pope, and without a Pope, their mandate evaporates. A small number of essential offices are explicitly exempt from this suspension. The Camerlengo, who manages the physical and financial affairs of the Holy See during the transition, continues to function. The major penitentiary, who handles matters related to confession and certain spiritual cases, keeps working because those pastoral needs do not pause. The Cardinal Vicar of Rome also continues his duties for the city. Everyone else essentially holds their position in a caretaker capacity, unable to issue new policies, sign major agreements, or make consequential appointments until the new pope is elected and restores their authority. Fact 5. He kept the white clothes by accident. One of the more visually confusing aspects of Benedict XVI's retirement was that he continued to dress in white after leaving office. The white cassock is one of the most recognizable symbols of the papacy. When people see a man in that distinctive white clerical garment, the natural assumption is that they are looking at the reigning pope. Having a former pope walking around in the same outfit as the sitting pope struck many observers as deeply awkward, and a number of church commentators suggested it created an unnecessary visual ambiguity, particularly for faithful Catholics who might encounter images of the two men. When asked about it, Benedict gave an answer that was remarkably straightforward and a little unexpected. He explained that the reason was essentially practical and almost accidental. When he resigned, there were simply no other clothes available for him to change into immediately. The Vatican had not prepared an alternative wardrobe for a retiring pope because no one had planned for this moment in the modern era. Benedict later added that by the time a suitable alternative could have been arranged, he had already been wearing the white cassock long enough that changing felt unnecessary. He did agree to stop wearing the white zucchetto, the small skull cap worn by popes, and began wearing a plain white one instead, as a modest way of visually distinguishing himself. He also dropped the red shoes that are traditionally worn by popes, but the white cassock stayed, and for nearly a decade, Vatican City had two men in white living within its walls, a situation with no real historical parallel in living memory. Fact 6. The Swiss Guard walked away immediately. The Pontifical Swiss Guard is one of the oldest and most recognized military units in the world, having served the papacy continuously since 1506. Their entire identity, their oath, their mission, and their legal authority are all bound to one specific person, the reigning pope. They do not serve the Vatican as an institution in any general sense, and they do not serve the Catholic Church as a whole. They serve the Pope personally, as his bodyguard. When Benedict XVI's resignation took effect at 8 o'clock in the evening on February 28, 2013, the Swiss Guard's protective duty over him ended at that precise moment. Benedict had traveled to Castel Gandolfo, the papal summer residence outside Rome, to spend his final hours as Pope before the vacancy officially began. The Swiss Guard accompanied him there and stood their posts right up until the clock struck 8. The instant the papacy was vacant, they withdrew. The responsibility for Benedict's personal security was immediately transferred to the Vatican Gendarmerie Corps, which is the Vatican's regular police force. The gendarmerie continued to protect Benedict for the remainder of his life. This clean handoff was not the result of any special negotiation. It simply followed from the fundamental terms of the Swiss Guard's 500-year-old mission. Once Benedict was no longer pope, he was no longer their charge, and they returned to their duties protecting the papal palaces and awaiting the election of a new pope. Fact 7. A medieval pope was imprisoned by his successor. The story of Pope Celestine V is one of the strangest in the long history of the papacy. In 1294, after a 2-year deadlock, the College of Cardinals elected Pietro da Morone, an elderly hermit monk who had spent decades living alone in the mountains of central Italy in a life of extreme religious austerity. He was 84 years old, had never held a major church office, and had never wanted any political power. He accepted the papacy reluctantly and was an almost immediate disaster as an administrator after only 5 months in office, unable to manage the complex political machinery of the medieval church and reportedly miserable in the role. He did something almost no pope had ever done. He announced his resignation. He then handed the papacy over to Cardinal Benedetto Caetani, who became Pope Boniface VIII. Celestine simply wanted to return to his cave in the mountains and live out his days as a hermit. Boniface, however, had a different concern. A living former pope, especially one who was widely regarded by the public as a saintly figure, represented a potential political threat. There were already voices in the church who questioned whether the resignation was even valid, and Boniface feared that Celestine could become a rallying point for his opponents or even be declared an anti-pope by rival factions. So Boniface had Celestine captured and imprisoned in the castle of Fumone in central Italy. Celestine died there in 1296, less than 2 years after his resignation, at around 90 years old. He was canonized as a saint in 1313. Fact 8. Dante put a resigning pope in hell. The medieval Italian poet Dante Alighieri wrote his masterwork, The Divine Comedy, in the early 1300s, and he had strong opinions about the political and religious figures of his era. When it came to Pope Celestine V, who had famously resigned the papacy in 1294, Dante was not sympathetic. In the Inferno, the first part of the Divine Comedy, Dante describes an area just inside the gates of hell called the Vestibule, a place designed for souls who were neither good enough for heaven nor bad enough for full damnation. These were people who, in Dante's moral framework, had refused to take a stand, who had been cowardly or indifferent at a critical moment when courage was required. Dante describes seeing a figure there who scholars have almost universally identified as Celestine, though Dante deliberately does not name him directly, referring only to the one who made the great refusal. The resignation, in Dante's view, was an act of moral cowardice, a man abandoning his sacred duty at a moment that demanded he stay and fight. The irony runs even deeper when you consider that Celestine's successor, Boniface VIII, the very man who benefited from the resignation and who later had Celestine imprisoned, appears later in the Inferno in the 8th circle, reserved for those guilty of simony, which is the buying and selling of religious offices. In Dante's construction, the man who resigned was damned for giving up, and the man who took his place was damned for corruption. Fact 9. 2 popes prepared resignation letters for war. The idea of a pope signing a resignation letter in advance, to be triggered only if a specific catastrophe occurred, sounds like something out of a thriller, but it happened at least twice in modern history, with two different popes responding to two different wars. In 1804, Pope Pius VII was preparing to travel to Paris to crown Napoleon Bonaparte as Emperor of France. It was a politically fraught journey, and the Pope's advisors were deeply concerned that Napoleon might seize or detain the Pope once he arrived in France. To protect the Church's leadership in case of that outcome, Pius VII signed a document before departing that effectively constituted a resignation to be invoked if he was imprisoned and rendered unable to govern. The idea was that a captive pope unable to freely exercise his office was functionally no longer governing, and the Church needed a clear mechanism to move forward. A century and a half later, during the Second World War, Pope Pius XII faced a similar threat. In 1943, Nazi Germany occupied Rome, and there were credible concerns that Hitler's forces might abduct the Pope. Pius XII prepared sealed instructions stating that if he were taken by the Nazis, he should be considered to have resigned immediately, and that the College of Cardinals should flee to a neutral country, specifically Portugal, and hold a conclave there to elect a new pope as quickly as possible, free from any outside pressure or interference. Fact 10. A fringe movement believes Benedict never resigned at all. Shortly after Benedict XVI's resignation in 2013, a small but vocal fringe movement emerged within conservative Catholic circles that argued the resignation was never actually valid in the first place. This position became known informally as benevacantism, a play on the term sedevacantism, which is the older fringe belief that the papal seat has been vacant since the reforms of the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s. The Benevacanists have put forward a variety of arguments for why Benedict's resignation should be considered canonically defective. One of the most commonly cited claims involves the specific Latin wording Benedict used. His statement used the phrase ministerio, meaning ministry, rather than muneri, meaning office, and some argued this meant he was resigning only from the active exercise of the papal ministry rather than from the office of Pope itself, which, according to this reading, would leave him technically still Pope and Francis, an illegitimate anti-pope. Mainstream canon lawyers and theologians have broadly rejected these arguments, pointing out that the Church clearly treated the resignation as valid, and that there is no credible basis in Church law for the distinction being drawn. Benedict himself, in multiple statements before his death in 2022, explicitly confirmed that his resignation was full and complete, and that Francis was the true pope. Despite this, the movement persisted. At least 5 Italian priests were formally excommunicated after publicly and persistently promoting the idea that Francis was not the valid pope. Fact 11. Benedict shortened the conclave rules on his way out. Among the last official acts of Benedict XVI's papacy was a quiet but significant change to the rules governing how quickly a conclave to elect a new pope can begin. Under the rules established by Pope John Paul II in 1996, a conclave could not begin until at least 15 days after the papal vacancy opened, and could be delayed by as many as 20 days to give cardinal electors time to travel to Rome from around the world. On February 22, 2013, just 6 days before his resignation was set to take effect, Benedict issued a document titled Normus Nonnullus, which amended those rules. The new provision allowed the College of Cardinals to begin the conclave earlier than 15 days, potentially as soon as all eligible cardinal electors had arrived in Rome, if they collectively chose to do so. The change was presented as a practical efficiency measure, allowing the Church to move more quickly if circumstances allowed. Critics at the time noted the unusual timing, with the sitting pope adjusting the rules for his own succession in the final week of his papacy, though no serious objection was raised as the change was well within his authority. The practical effect was significant. Because most cardinal electors were already in Rome or arrived quickly, the conclave began on March 12, 2013, just 12 days after the vacancy opened. Pope Francis was elected the very next day, March 13th, one of the faster conclaves in recent history. Fact 12. One pope sold the papacy, then resigned. Twice. In the long and sometimes turbulent history of the medieval papacy, Pope Benedict IX stands out as a figure of almost singular dysfunction. He became pope for the first time around 1032, reportedly at a very young age, possibly as young as his early 20s, through the influence of his powerful aristocratic family. His pontificate was marked by violence, scandal, and political conflict, and he was actually driven out of Rome by a popular uprising on more than one occasion. What makes his story uniquely strange is what happened between his stints in office. In 1045, Benedict IX made a decision that shocked even the cynical political culture of the medieval church. He sold the papacy. He agreed to hand over the office to his godfather, a man named John Gratian, who became Pope Gregory VI in exchange for a substantial payment, the exact nature of which has been debated by historians, but appears to have included significant valuables and possibly a regular stipend. This was, by almost any measure, an act of simony, the buying and selling of sacred office. But the story does not end there. Benedict IX later changed his mind, returned to Rome, and reclaimed the papacy by force. He held the office a third time before finally being ousted for good. He is the only man in the history of the Catholic Church to have been pope for 3 distinct, non-consecutive periods, and the only one known to have literally sold the position. Fact 13. The resigning pope ceases to be a cardinal. Before a man is elected pope, he is almost always already a cardinal, the senior rank of clergy just below the papacy itself. The cardinals are the ones who elect the pope, and historically, the pope is chosen from among their number, though technically any baptized Catholic male is eligible. Once elected, however, a man becomes pope, and the papacy is understood to be entirely separate from and above the rank of cardinal. He is no longer functioning as a cardinal in any formal sense. When a pope resigns, an interesting question arises. What exactly does he revert to? The answer, as Vatican spokesman Federico Lombardi confirmed following Benedict XVI's resignation in 2013, is that a retired pope is not a cardinal. He does not go back to his former rank. He holds no seat in the College of Cardinals, cannot vote in a future conclave, and has no formal role or authority within the Roman Curia, which is the Vatican's central administrative body. What he is, technically speaking, is a retired bishop. Benedict had been ordained a bishop decades before his election as pope, and bishop is the foundational order of the 3 levels of holy orders in Catholic teaching: bishop, priest, and deacon. The resignation removed him from the papacy, but could not remove his episcopal ordination. So Benedict lived out his final years as a private bishop, residing inside Vatican City as a guest of his successor, without any official governing role, voting rights, or formal position in the Church's hierarchy. Fact 14. The resignation doesn't need a specific time. Except Benedict's did canon law sets a very minimal bar for what makes a papal resignation valid. It must be freely made and publicly declared. There is nothing in church law that requires the resignation to take effect at any particular time of day, and historically, there has been no reason to specify an exact moment. A pope could announce his resignation to take effect the following week or at the end of the month, without specifying an hour. But when Benedict XVI drafted his resignation announcement, he chose to be extraordinarily precise. He stated explicitly that his resignation would take effect at 8 o'clock in the evening, Vatican time, on February 28, 2013. Not at the end of the day, not at midnight, but at exactly 2000 hours. This level of specificity had no canonical requirement behind it and appears to have been entirely Benedict's personal choice, though Vatican observers have suggested it was rooted in his deeply methodical and scholarly personality. The precision had real practical consequences. Vatican officials, journalists, and church leaders around the world were able to count down to the exact second. When 8 o'clock arrived, the See of Rome was officially vacant at that precise moment. Swiss guards stood down from their posts at Castel Gandolfo as the clock struck 8. For the first time in nearly 600 years, an exact timestamp marked the end of a papacy through resignation rather than death. Fact 15. Pope Francis had his own secret resignation letter, sitting in a drawer. In 2022, Pope Francis gave an interview in which he disclosed something that had not been previously known. Shortly after his election to the papacy in 2013, he had written a letter of resignation and placed it in the hands of the Vatican Secretary of State. The letter was predated and written in advance, not because Francis was planning to resign, but as a contingency measure. The letter was intended to take effect automatically if Francis were to become medically incapacitated in a way that permanently prevented him from exercising his duties as Pope. Francis has dealt with significant health issues over the years, including the surgical removal of part of one lung in his youth and more recent intestinal surgery. He explained that he believed it was responsible governance to have a clear mechanism in place in case he became unable to govern. This disclosure raised immediate questions among canon lawyers and church commentators. Under the rules governing papal resignations, a resignation must be a freely made, conscious act at the time it is declared. A pre-written letter that activates automatically based on a medical assessment by third parties raises complicated questions about whether it would meet that standard, since the Pope himself might be incapacitated and unable to confirm or withdraw it in the moment. Francis acknowledged this ambiguity himself, noting that the legal questions around such a letter had not been fully resolved. As of the time of his disclosure, the letter was still sitting in a drawer inside the Vatican, its ultimate validity an open and unresolved question in church law.